Hi, my name is Jamie Tomey, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this week's Evanston Bound Quarantine Tour, brought to you by Artist Bookhouse. Today we're speaking with Kevin Kelley of the New York Public Library. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our quarantine tour for today. Today we're talking with our dear friend Kevin Kelley from the New York Public Library. Hi, Kevin.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I am good. The sun is shining and the birds are chirping, and I'm happy as I can be.
Okay, so usually how we start these conversations is that the question of how did you come to the book arts? But you are not a book artist. You've only made paper one time in your entire life. Am I right?
That's true, just that time that you were there for.
Yeah. In the loft here at Evanston Public Library, we had our paper making session, and a 12-year-old Cecily taught you how to make paper. And you haven't you are not a book artist, but you are a library person. So how did you come to librarianship, I guess is how I want to start the conversation. What was your path? Did you always want to be a librarian?
No, I always wanted to be a Spice Girl, but they disbanded. So I came to the library world through education. I have a background in arts education. I worked at a college that homed a children's theater. One of the things that I always struggled with that was that I loved working with young people. I loved talking with them and engaging with them. But one of the problems that I had was that there was always a fee, right? There was like an entry fee to participate. And certainly we did our best to include people and to expand our horizons as wide as we could. But ultimately, we had bills to pay, we had payroll to meet. And then Adam and I moved to Chicago. I got the job in Evanston, and it all sort of clicked into place. Working with young people, breaking down the barriers to access the things that they were asking for. One of my favorite things about librarianship is when a young person comes to you and says, "I need this." I always sort of try to respond with yes, and then figure out how to get there from that. And that was, one of the great things I got to do at Evanston. It's literally my whole job at NYPL now, so I love it. Yeah.
So tell us about that job at NYPL, because you moved there uh 2 years ago. Has it been two, 3 years?
I guess a year and a half.
Year and a half ago, right? And so you started out at a branch, right, in the Bronx.
Yeah.
So tell us about that, how you came to the job that you're doing now, and what is the job that you're doing now?
Yeah. So I was offered a job at the New York Public Library, and it was a branch job as a children's librarian. And so I said, let's do this. Adam and I picked up everything that we had in Chicago and moved to New York. I worked as a children's librarian at a branch in the Bronx, at the Belmont branch, in the Little Italy section of the Bronx. It's like a very unique little neighborhood because there's a college, like Fordham University is right there, and then next to it is this little pocket of the last Little Italy in the 5 boroughs that hasn't been commercialized. And the Bronx itself has, I think, 4 total Michelin-starred restaurants, and 3 were within walking distance of the branch. And so it was a really cool little neighborhood with the college and with this very sort of strong identity. But then this position came up. I spent a year as a children's librarian, and this position came up, and I liked what it was, and so I applied for it, and I got it, as one does, I guess, with the job.
What is the job?
Oh, so I am the coordinator for after-school programs at the New York Public Library. It's a new position. I started the position in January, and then the second week of March, we shut down. So a lot of the position is the sort of 2-pronged. The first prong is that we are the biggest library system that doesn't have homework help available for students across the board. Chicago Public has it, King County has it, LA has it. We do not have it. And so the first prong was to start free after-school homework help and tutoring for young people, kindergarten through middle school. The second prong was, and this is wonderfully vague, and so it was said to me by the head of education, so I'm going to say it now, and that was to draw a circle around all of the after-school services and out-of-school time services offered by NYPL and see how we could increase sort of like the standard. I guess drawing a circle around it means you make it a little bit better, you make it a little bit more cohesive. And that was the part that we never were fully staffed for our after school program before we shut down.
So figuring out how to actually make that more cohesive across all the branches in New York.
Yeah.
How many branches are there in that library system?
So there are 92. We're the second largest public library system in America, right after the Library of Congress, third largest in the world after Library of Congress and the British Library. That does include 4 research libraries, but 92 total locations.
Wow. That is a huge system, and that's a lot of people to coordinate because the New York student population, what you said, is it K8 that you're working with the after school? Is that right? That's a huge group of children to service.
Yeah,
and this is a new position, so you kind of have those 2 prongs of goals.
So we're piloting right now at a select number of branches with the idea. Initially they were like, starting next semester we'd be at 40 branches, and then by the next semester we'd be at all 92.
The rollout has changed.
That's going to change. What that looks like right now is too far away to tell with COVID-19. Yeah, it's a big circle to draw. We have a lot of freedom. What was really cool is that we have really big institutional support.
Right.
Brian Bannon, who is a Chicago Public Library guy, just was onboarded at NYPL as like one of the directors, and he's really passionate about the work that my department is doing. And so it's cool because NYPL says, figure out how to best do it. And then we're given sort of a lot of license within that to figure out best practices.
Yeah. And I love, and this is something that I know about you that we haven't sort of said, except that you worked for a children's theater, is that you have a really strong theater background. And so the thing with theater / improv, I'm going to pull the improv thing in, is the idea of yes and. So you take whatever somebody says and say yes and then you build on that. And so one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago with talking to teens in particular, is they say, I need something, this is what I need, and you say yes. And I feel like the way that you described it, and the way that I know you, because I work with you and know you as a friend, but is that you have a tendency to say yes and let's figure it out how to get it. So do you feel like that is a real basis for your job, and that you have that institutional support, that they're saying yes and do what you need to programming wise, and that situation? Is that your way of working?
Yeah, kind of. There are of course there are sort of expectations that we meet. We have to have, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how to yes and also keep things academically rigorous enough that we can sort of justify during our fundraisers.
Right.
Keep it fun enough with like the and to say to like get the kids in the door, and actually get their feet in, because they're voting with their feet. So yes, I do have that institutional support, but there are, of course,
there are parameters, of course.
There are parameters within it, but it's.
And so we have a question from Angie in the chat. How are you starting with K8 and potentially adding 9 to 12 grades later? So will you work with the high schoolers later in these programs? Is that something that's going to be built upon?
So that's a great question. And when all of this started, it was on the radar as something to figure out once we had really established these practices for K through 8. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is because like the tutors that we hire are would have to have like sort of different training or work with high schooler, with like organic chemistry versus
Mhm.
shapes.
Right.
So it was certainly like on the radar for discussion. We are very excited to help out as many people as possible. Um, but right now, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ideally, if the city bounces back quickly, then certainly. But right now, we're focusing on K through 8.
Yeah, yeah. So, and also building on the program, sort of like you mentioned, there's a very different person who works with second graders than who can actually handle working with 10th graders.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. And also, a lot of the branches have space parameters because it's Manhattan, it's the Bronx, it's Staten Island. Some
right,
of these buildings are very old and very tiny, um, and just don't have the sheer table space for it.
right, right.
That's something else we're thinking about too, is like fitting it in within
Yeah.
the actual physical parameters that we have. So.
Yeah, and speaking to that, are you thinking, is there the opportunity to expand into maybe some of the parks, or to have your programs out and about and not stuck to the branches? Is
Um,
that an option, or is that not a thing they're
Um,
encouraging?
I know individual branches, especially those with parks very close, already do story times and do programs at the park. Um, when I was a branch librarian in the Bronx, we were very, very close to the New York Zoo. We were very close to the Bronx Botanical Gardens. Um, we were very close to like like a river reserve. And so we definitely partnered with them. Um, I don't know if that's like necessarily on the radar anymore.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
only really been 2-ish months of actual sort of good work done on the program before we had to pivot.
yeah. So, and then one of the things that I did want to talk to you about is, how has librarianship changed? And you can speak to this for your role, but also for your colleagues' role a little bit, about how it's changed in New York during this time of shutdown. How has that how has that pivot happened, and what have you seen your colleagues dealing with? Because your program planning is different than face to face with patrons, but how do you see librarianship changing for the shutdown, but also moving forward? What do you think is going to happen? Two
Oh,
questions again. I do this
you
double question all the time. I'm sorry.
double whammies too.
I know, right? I'm like, bam, and then also bam.
How
And
have things
answer coherently, Kevin.
Right, I'm gonna try. Okay, so how have things changed? So I'll start with me. We the program, the sort of like the job that I was hired to do, the role I was hired to figure out is largely dependent upon physical locations being open. Um, and that's true across the board. Libraries are like very sort of like, we have like a digital presence, there's a digital branch, right? But
Right.
often the services are really focused on what you can do for people in real space, real time. Um, and um, so pivoting away from that, certainly sort of for us, since we're such a large institution, has been a bit of a like a growing learning curve. We have fully sort of invested in a digital experience for summer reading, story time, and for patron engagement.
Hmm.
Uh, what's lucky is that, at least with youth services, the Department of Education has also deeply invested in trying to make sure that a majority of the students in New York City have access to technology and Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Uh, And so that has been a help. We've completely revamped the summer reading program that I have been heavily involved with. We have we're doing like an extended sort of summer camp with activity guides and videos. I've got to
Yeah.
film a dance video later today for
Oh,
that.
fun.
And so I guess what my colleagues and I guess, have been dealing with is, how do we interpret branch services for a digital branch? We're really trying to figure it out as if the digital life is like um, its own branch in our 92 branch system. Uh,
Okay. So 93 branches.
90, yeah, 93 branches is true. And it's I mean, it's wild because we have a huge staff who are all really qualified, really smart, incredibly vetted,
Yeah.
at the top of their game. But it's also about there's also like this huge like legal liability aspect of it too. Uh,
Right.
so we're still trying to figure it out. I think this summer reading is going to be a big test kitchen for us when it comes to figuring out what librarianship looks like for us right now.
Yeah.
Uh, we are getting ready. We have a plan in place for branches to start reopening. Um, but I don't think that there's going to be a reality, at least in New York City,
Yeah.
where um, we have a full service branch this year.
Right.
The
Right.
program,
You're
you know,
talking through December, still doing just curbside and digital and that sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah, unless there's some sort of like medical intervention that no one is expecting, or a vaccine
Yeah.
is very quickly. Just because I mean, New York, everyone sardined on top of anchovy. I don't know, sardine, yeah, on top of
Yeah. Yeah.
everything. And the branches are, I mean, community hubs. I mean, people come
Yeah.
and they all day. At the branch that I was at, we had this like group of probably 15 to 20 older retired Italian people who would come by and they would play games all day and they would speak in Italian and they would like it was like a community center,
Yeah.
because we had air conditioning, Wi-Fi. We don't ask that you pay for anything when you walk in, and so I really think that that's going to be sort of the big thing that we have to figure
Yeah.
out. Maybe that's a partnership with the Parks Department. Maybe that's a partnership with the DOE. Um,
Yeah. Trying to figure all of that out is
yeah,
tricky. But I
and then
love I love that you were I'm sorry, I lost your sound there for a second.
and then they're trying to implement it in an equitable way across 92 branches is going to
Of
be
course, across
the
a millions of people in the entire city, of course. It's a balancing act of all of the things. I love your focus, personal focus on equity and um, accessibility for all people. And so let's pivot our conversation. You are a strong worker bee, I guess, for LGBTQ rights and learning. And I want to talk a little bit about that and how you work with teens and children with that lens for equity and uplifting LGBTQ voices, writers, and stories. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how that is important to you and why okay, I will stop myself from asking a double question, Kevin. I will stop. Just answer
uh,
question number one, sir.
yeah. So how do I do? I mean, as like a person who's very proud to be queer, um, there's just like nothing that I can approach without that being foremost in at least my mind. Um, and so I don't know. It's like that's an interesting question. I just always try to focus. So okay, let me back up.
Yeah.
So a lot of, um, especially the people in who are coming out and hanging out in libraries are there. I often think for a reason. Um, And the reason it can be anything. They don't want to go home quite yet after school. They are waiting for a parent to pick them up. They wanted to come grab something for school. Um, but so far, in my experience in libraries, there's always been a lot of foot traffic of young people coming in and hanging out. Um, and of course, each one of them is bringing their identity into this shared space. And I think that sort of any space that you can push against sort of this heteronormative, gender normative, racial normative space. Any way you can push against that, like it queers your space, makes your space a little bit more radical, and therefore a little bit more inclusive. Um, because a lot of times, some of the people that are using, at least regularly, they're using the library are people who are maybe have less access at home,
Mhm.
or who maybe, um, there's some reason that um, they're in the library, right?
Right.
Uh, and so I try to keep that at the front of my mind. Um, right now, with this like COVID world that we're in, it's wild to think that there are, young queer people who are not safe in their homes. And that's something that I grapple with every single day. Um, and then there is, like a political revolution going on right now.
Right. Right.
I am also at the forefront of my mind is the fact that like the reason we have Pride Month is because of like, trans women of color starting a movement, starting a riot. And so a lot of this, I don't know, I fully detract from the question.
No, no, this is all layers of the question. And you mentioned
Yeah,
Stonewall, so we can talk about the Stonewall a little bit too, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to just say this is all layers of the same thing. There's
yeah,
so many layers to this topic. So continue, sir.
yeah. And so part of how I queer a space is I guess a little bit more subtle. There was when I was like searching out literature when I was a young person, I no one was pointing me toward anything canonically queer. There wasn't a ton of canonically queer stuff back in the 80s. Um, but I still found characters that have a large queer fan base, like Storm from the X-Men or Sailor Moon or The Wizard of Oz, all these properties that mean a lot to me, and that were the basis sort of for my queer identity. And when working with young people, especially not teenagers, young people, the way that you can sort of radicalize or expose them to queer stories is the way that I did it, is through sort of these characters who traditionally, not traditionally, but like have a large sort of built-in queer fan base. Um, that being said, there's a lot more material now for young people to expand their horizons. Parents are a lot more invested now in making sure that their child has a well-rounded, exposure palette.
Right.
Um, that's good. A lot of the stories, more of the stories now that are being told to people are better. They don't
Yeah.
have to die at the end. They don't have to like necessarily deal with AIDS like they had to, back in stories from the 80s. And so that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Uh, and when I was working with teens, the it's a really radical act to just like listen to someone when they talk to you,
Yeah.
um, to meet them where they're at, and
Mhm.
then hear them and not try to like explain away the hurt or try to solve their problem. Like a radical act can just be like helping them bear that emotional burden for
Right.
5 minutes.
Right.
Um, and that is a lot of sort of I mean, there were a ton of queer people running around that loft for a very long time when I was there, and a
Right.
lot because I would listen to them, and if they wanted something, I would do my best to get it for them. But a lot of it was just like, here is like a queer grown up listening to me. I'm safe here. My friends can be safe here too.
Right.
Um,
It's an honoring of the person in
yeah,
the moment. And also, you mentioned sort of listening to the hurt and holding on to the hurt for them, sort of making that relationship be the most important thing and not um, honoring the person, of
yeah,
course.
yeah.
Did you have that for yourself growing up in Missouri? Did you have people like that?
Oh, I think we're about to get a cameo from my husband. Oh no, we're not.
Oh,
Okay. um, I did. I, when I was a kid, I did. I like to say that I was like, the show Dance Moms,
yeah.
one of those kids, and so I had uh, a bevy of grown up queer people that were maybe not a part of my family, but that were part of my extended family. And I use family in like a chosen family context.
Right, right. Not relational by blood, but relational by meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did, and that is a large part of why I love librarianship, is because if I can be that for someone, then um, I really value that, and I would really like to hold on to it. And if I can do that for someone who doesn't have to invest a ton of money into a hobby or a practice.
Right. All the better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a question from Rebecca. You mentioned listening as a radical act. Can you talk about the role of hospitality, both in the queer community and in the library context? And I'm going to add another layer to that question, of course, because that's what I do. The intersection between the two, the queer community and the library context, and the layers of that, because you mentioned we continue to have, even though you've left, a lot of queer teens and children coming into the loft and hanging out when we're open. Of course, right now we don't get to see people that much, but the layering between the queer and library communities. And so I'm going to add that second question on there, Kevin.
Yeah.
So the role of hospitality in both communities.
The role of hospitality. Ooh, that's a great question, Rebecca. Thank you. Oh gosh.
Like, wait, how do I answer that? Because we have like 30 minutes left and we still have to get to the reading list. Oh my gosh. This is like, we could talk about this for 2 hours.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said for hospitality in a library context. There is something to be said for an institution not requiring anything from you to be a part of their space. There's something quite radical about not having to pay to sit at it. I mean, now, sort of in our big American story right now, there's something very radical about not having to pay to sit at a table and exist.
Right.
There's no tax on it, when you're coming into a library, unlike when you go to a Starbucks or when you go to the mall,
Right.
It's like a whole third space that you can just be in. And there's a whole bunch of space that we could talk about, but we don't have time for that. I think that there is something very inherently queer about just that prospect of saying, you're in this space, I value you, you belong, no matter what you're bringing to the table. I'm sort of struck by, the inclusion of more letters in the LGBTQIA plus, 2S acronym, in that it's increasing the size of the table that we're all welcome at, increasing the number of plates at the potluck. And there's just something very queer about saying yes to people and bringing them into your community, listening to their voice, and not expecting them to meet whatever society's standards of existence are, be that who you're attracted to, how you identify. And so, at least for me and for my understanding of my experience, queerness and radicalness are often holding hands, if not often the same thing. So,
if not hugging and
not hugging, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I love that you mentioned the addition of all of the letters, but also the addition of different colors on the pride flag too. That's just happened in the last couple of years for the inclusion of people of color on the pride flag. The layers of intersectionality in pride, and also in library space, and also in hospitality, and also all the things. So did you answer? I think there was also I guess you answered Rebecca's question. We can ask Rebecca if you answered it. She'll get back to us. But so it is Pride Month, and one of the things that was really awesome when you worked here in the loft is that you started our Pride Party here in the loft, and we have had such fun with that. in previous years, and unfortunately we can't do that in person this year. But is that something that you look forward to with your existence in New York Public Library system, doing a Pride, or do they already have the Pride parties in place, or
Yeah.
how is that shifting a little bit for you? And the, because Pride parades, of course, have been closed down because of COVID all across, so we can't actually have parades and official capacities. But multiple layered question, Kevin. I apologize.
Oh, it's good.
Speak
It's all.
to that a little bit, sir. While we have
So,
you.
yeah. So when I came on board at NYPL, um, NYPL already has a legacy of doing what is called an anti-prom. Um, and it's sort of found its roots in like a prom for people who were maybe um, queer of center, who didn't feel safe at their school's prom, and so they opened up the doors to SASB, the Stephen Allen Schwartzman building, um, for a prom for queer people. It has since sort of grown into um, just like an inclusive prom where um, there are many more voices that and represented many more voices represented sort of within the prom itself.
Sure.
The first year I was there was the first year the Banks had an anti-prom. It happened in my branch.
Ah,
Very excited. I there was I was ready to volunteer at all of the anti-proms this year, but of course that's not happening. Um, the theme was 90s movies, and
oh
I was
my God.
very excited to go dressed as Cher Horowitz.
Of course.
And go with some of my compatriots as the crew from Clueless. As far as parades go, last year NYPL marched in the parade. My husband works for the Trevor Project. They are a specifically queer nonprofit. They always march in the parade, and so we were,
Yeah.
invested in the parade as well. And I know that the anti-prom experience is in process of pivoting to a digital environment. Um, I don't what that looks like. I don't know. I'm not on the committee, so
Yeah,
yeah,
but you'll probably participate, of course.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. You created a reading list for us for some queer and LGBTQ slanted books for Pride Month. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with these books and where your thinking was in framing this for Artist Bookhouse?
I created like a very short list. I tried to use my experience on the ALA Stonewall Youth and Young Adult Awards Book Committee. I served my first term on it last year. I'm on it again this year, although the meetings are much more sort of wild and sporadic, as is the publishing industry right now. Uh,
Sure.
and so that's where I drew my recommendations from, are books that I've read. I tried to do books that are very current because I know that I'm not the only person singing the praises of these books. I just want to sing the praises of the ones that I know are great. I don't know that any of these will be surprises to people, but these are at least books I can vouch for. So some picture books that I really love from either this year or the previous years. From this year, Drawing on the Walls, a story of Keith Haring by Matthew Burgess, is brand new this year. A picture book about Keith Haring, who was an influential queer artist in the 80s. I really love it. It's huge. It's got these big, beautiful pictures. From last year, of course, When Ada Became a Brother by Kyle Lukoff and Kehlani Juanita. I also wanted to highlight Julian is a Mermaid, specifically because it's getting a sequel called Julian at the Wedding, which I'm very excited for. I loved Julian as a Mermaid. The art is just like incredible, and I expect that the art from At the Wedding will also be incredible. So some middle grade books that I love from last year. The Best at It by Malik Pancholi was incredible. it was nice because nothing bad happens in it, which in middle grade and YA can sometimes be not the case. It was also on the Evanston best of list last year. King and the Dragonflies by Kevin Kelley, a middle grade book from this year. It is on the heavier side, so if you're in the mood for something heavy, go for it. It's really lovely. And the other one that I have for middle graders is A High Five for Glenn Burke by Bill Bildner. It's a coming out story. It's a story about baseball. It's a story about the guy who invented the high five. Glenn Burke is a baseball player from the 80s. He was a black man who was gay in the 80s, was out, was a baseball player, invented the high five, fired from all of his jobs, of course. And so it's a book about him. It's a book about this. I believe he's in like the 6th or 7th grade. It's a story about the coming out process and how it's a process and not a destination, which is what I really loved about it. It's also got sports, which is something that not always books have. A lot of books focus on drag, which is great. I love drag so much, but it's not the whole experience. So for YA, from this year, Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, her newest book in verse novel about two girls and their relationship with their father. It's also very heavy. It's incredible. It's just, it's everything about it is wonderful. I also really liked from last year and this year, Black Flamingo by Dean Atta, also YA, also in verse. Originally published last year in the UK, published this year in the US, won the Stonewall Award. Also from last year, Like a Love Story, Nazanian, fully incredible. My favorite book of last year. And so that's that for the YA books. For grown-up books, none of them are from this year because I haven't had time to read grown-up books yet this year. And so Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, 10 out of 10. Fully incredible. It's wonderful. My favorite thing that I've read in a long time. There's also The Stonewall Reader, which was published last year and edited by NYPL Public Library, talking a lot about the history of the riots and uses voices from the riots to tell the story of the riots. Really lovely. And then Real Queer America by Samantha Allen, telling stories of queer folk from the Midwest and the South.
Thank you, Kevin, for putting that list together for us. I really appreciate the fact that you have chosen 3 from each age range. I love that. I do read a lot of YA, of course. YA is a new branding of books, specifically focusing on a certain age range of this teen space. And so a lot of people are judgy when it comes to adults reading YA. And I don't like that because it's really great literature. Can you talk about that a little bit?
YA, you're right. It gets adult readers of YA are often judged. I would also say that genre publishing trend of YA also probably gets a little bit of judgment because it's A, incredibly profitable, and B, still fairly new. And so it's not seen as sort of as serious or as high art, as maybe books written for grown-ups. But in my experience reading YA, it is every bit as good as, if not better than most of the grown-up books I've read. What I love about YA stories is that a lot of time the excess has been trimmed out. And so what you're getting is the story without
extraneous business.
Correct. But what is also so incredible is that authors like Elizabeth Acevedo are finding ways to absolutely flourish and thrive in a YA setting. Because you Up and You Land, you read her poetry, and it is breathtaking. It's mesmerizing. It is accessible. Oh, I just got chills thinking about her poetry because it's just like good. There's
so
nothing
beautiful. Yeah.
There's nothing about it that wouldn't appeal to a grown-up audience other than the branding and the packaging that it comes in.
Right.
Also say that middle grade is really not going to be the park. Erin Entrada Kelly released a book this year. It's not queer, so that's why I didn't talk about it yet. We Dream of Space.
We Dream of Space by Erin Estrada Kelly. Yes, lovely. So really great literature coming out of that are really valuable for grown-ups to read as well. Eddie did have a question in the chat. Kevin, can you talk about your experience on the Stonewall Book Awards Committee? How did you get involved? What have you learned from the experience? And then my mom says, we who are older remember most public libraries in the 50s and 60s have extra letters of YA on books for teens and preteens. Took the publishers a long time to do what the librarians had done to help the readers. So the librarians did the work first, and then the publishing industry follows, which is kind of history, right? That's what happens. So can you speak to Eddie's incredible three-pronged question?
Yeah. I'm going to start with the middle prong. I got involved because I saw on the listserv the call for volunteers. The listserv, just the GLBTRT listserv, which is now the Rainbow Roundtable. The experience has been absolutely wonderful. I love being a part of a committee. I love being a part of a conversation. If I can use my voice and my privilege and push the conversation and make things queerer than I left them, I'm here for that. And so I love working on the committees because I get to push, the gay agenda a little bit further forward. I see what young people of color especially, are reading, what they're responding to, how they're responding to it, and I can advocate for that. And I love that, because it's not just me. I don't exist in a vacuum. I also recognize that I'm bringing like a white face into a conversation that is historically white, and that if I can listen to the kids and relay what they're saying into this sort of national thing, then I'm going to do that. I have learned a lot. I've also learned not a lot. I've learned that, when you're on these committees, especially a YA committee, you get books. We got shipped 250 books last year, Adam and I. And this year, I think we were set to receive 350, but then COVID hit. And I learned that my queer agenda is not the same as other people's queer agenda. And what I've learned is how to marry those two things, keeping the kids in mind.
You're adding the kids' voices to this larger conversation, and your ego doesn't seem to be the big part of it.
I try. Of course, I have my own biases. Of course, I have things that I love, things that I really respond to that maybe others don't. But I try to keep an open mind. So what I find is that a lot of books, at least to me, feel as if they are written with an agenda, and that agenda is to get a group of grown-up white people to read it and then put an award. I keep that in my head as I'm reading it. Clearly, some of these books are not published for kids, but are published for grown-ups who are handing books to kids. This year on the committee is an 8th grade teacher. I think you need to be involved in youth services in some capacity, but you don't have to be like a degree librarian to participate.
Wow, that's awesome. I do have to say that I so appreciate and love you, Kevin. You are one of my favorites. And I really want to thank you for being a part of this. You have added another layer to our Quarantors with librarianship and conversations around queer reading and personhood, I guess, is the word I want to say. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Quarantor with Kevin Kelley from the New York Public Library. It was such a lovely layered conversation about all things LGBTQ pride, all things librarianship, and I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did as well. If you'd like to support more programming like this, please visit us on our website, artistsbookhouse.org/donate, and send us a couple bucks. For the cost of a latte in normal times, you can donate $5, and it will really, really help us continue our online programming. Thank you.